Okay, hello girls. So after grading your exams, I am going to upload this video in which you are going to be able to see what are the right answers and also where were you able to find them. Where was this information that you had to answer here? So well, first of all, here we have our exam. In this first part, all the questions were worth half a point. But let's see the questions, and actually all of these questions and the ones in the next part of the exam can be found in precisely this document. And as you see over here, if the question is in which century Alaric sacked Rome, that is the first question, right? So in which century did Alaric sacked Rome? In the number 5, in the 5th century, Alaric sacks Rome. You can see right over there, right? Alaric sacks Rome. So the answer to this one is 5. I cannot write it. There you have it. Then this century may be called the century of the Franks because it marks the beginning of the Frankish expansion. So the beginning of the Frankish expansion, over here you have it as the beginning, because in the 5th century it is as the end, and I told you to be really careful on seeing if I was asking you the beginning of or the end. So over here the beginning is the beginning of the 6th century, so we can write it over here. Then we have this century ends with the expansion of the Eastern Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. Again, it is the 6th century. We can see that the S2 or final state is the Byzantine Empire. And here we have it. So again, that is going to be a 6. Over there, yes. Then which century marks the expansion of Islam? This one you should know it by heart. And it is the 7th century. Just let me here. 7th century. Islamic expansion. So this is the 7th century again. In this century, the Visigoths defeat Attila in the Battle of the Catalonian Plains. So far, we have been going in order, right? 5, 6, 6, 7, and now this one is going to change because the Battle of the Catalonian Plains is over here. In the 5th century is the second one that we have going from the upper part down. So that is going to be the 5th century over here. Then this century starts with the entry of Islam to Europe, the conquest of the Visigothic kingdom or Spain. Well, we know that it is the 8th century, of course. In here, Don Rodrigo is defeated, the Islamic conquest of Spain, or also, well, Islam enters Europe, the Islamic expansion. That is the beginning of the century, so it is the century number 8. During this century, the Umayyad family starts ruling the caliphate. That is the 7th century, of course, but you can see it over here, Umayyad Caliphate. Just above Don Rodrigo seizes the Visigothic throne, so it is 7. So now we have it. Now in this exercise you only have to choose the beginning and the end of the century, and it is basically the same because if you see, all of them are worth 1 point. So it is basically the same because if you chose one correctly, I would give you half a point. So it is basically the same exercise. Tell me the beginning and the end in here of the 8th century. So what we have to do is go to our card about the 8th century, and it says that it starts over here with the Islamic expansion or Don Rodrigo defeated of the Visigothic kingdom, and after that, the Islamic conquest of Spain, and it ends with the Holy Roman Empire, in which Charlemagne is crowned as the Western Emperor. So, as we were saying, it starts with the defeat of Don Rodrigo when Islam enters Spain, and it ends with the Holy Roman Empire or the Carolingian Empire. This is, of course, would change order. The answers change order, and I was going to wait to publish this video, but I decided to do a different exam for each group because of some things that I was able to notice in your own exams. So I am not going to repeat the same exam, so you can have the answer. It doesn't matter. So again, over here, but we are going to be talking about the century number 5. So all you have to do is go to century number 5, Roman Empire and barbaric kingdom. So Alaric sacks Rome, and Clovis defeats Syagrius, or Odoacer deposes Romulus. We have two options over there. So we're going to go over here and we say Odoacer deposes Romulus, Frankish expansion, yes, and also Alaric sacks Rome. Those were the two correct options. However, if you chose also Clovis starts the Frankish expansion, I counted that as correct because again it is Clovis, the Frankish expansion, and over here the Frankish expansion. So any of them were correct. I took them as right. Now in the open questions, how is the entry of Islam to Spain related to the establishment of the Carolingian Empire? Think about the people involved. Well, I am going to have to remember you over here. Of course, we have it in our cards, but over here we have it with very nice drawings. So this is the 8th century. And if you remember, and these were the slides that we saw, in here we have the Islamic kingdom in the lower part. Then we have Don Rodrigo in Spain. Then Don Rodrigo is going to be defeated. And in here we have what I was asking. Remember that the Islamic State was wanting or was trying to enter France, but Charles Martel, which was Charlemagne's grandfather, is going to defeat them in the Battle of Poitiers. And remember that I even told you that the clue over here was to remember the Lord of the Rings, because just as Gandalf stopped the Balrog, Charles Martel stopped the advance of the Islamic State. So over here, the relation between the entry of Islam to Spain and the Carolingian Empire is that Charles Martel, and I am sure that you remember that we saw this in class, defeated the Islamic, or let's rather write Muslims, in the Battle of Poitiers. Well, this should be with capital letters. Battle of Poitiers, gaining power enough to, let's say, depose the Merovingians, because if you remember, the first kings of France was of course Clovis, that was a Merovingian. We're going to have this change between the Carolingians and the Merovingians. Over here we have it. Remember that precisely Charles Martel, winning in this Battle of Poitiers, is going to win enough power that he was able to replace the Merovingian family, and we're going to have the start of the Carolingians. If you remember, we saw it just over here in class, and of course it is shown in your cards. So we can answer the other one. Explain the division between the early and the late Middle Ages. Remember that by the 9th century we're going to have the beginning of the feudal institutions, precisely by the hand of Charlemagne, and we're also going to have the Viking intrusions or incursions. So remember that these two things are going to be changing the way in which Europe is going to be organized throughout the rest of the Middle Ages. Because from one side, we're going to start having this very established structure that is going to be the feudal institutions, and from the other side, the Viking incursions are going to be having a very important well, a very important place to develop within the history of Europe, mainly the history of France, because if you remember, by the 9th century, the grandson of Charlemagne is going to be giving Normandy to Roland the Viking. But we of course saw that. So again, what is the intention behind the documents? We are now over here. What is the intention behind the documents known as the Pippin and the Constantine's donations? Again, if we go over here in the 8th century, because remember that this exam only went as far as the 9th century, you remember that we saw over here Pippin's donation and the Constantine's donation. And remember that, well, as you can see, this was the last part that we saw about Charlemagne. And remember that these were documents. Pippin's donation is the document in which the father of Charlemagne is giving the territories of Rome to the to the Pope. If you see, remember that we said that these yellow parts are going to be the state of the Pope. They are going to be given to the Pope by the father of Charlemagne, and that is the Pippin's donation. And the Constantine's donation, remember that it is a false document that was presented to Pippin, that was supposed to be written by Constantine, the Eastern Emperor in the 3rd century, but it was a false document. But according to those people, that document was establishing that those territories were the right of the Pope. So they used that false document in order to convince the father of Charlemagne, Pippin, to actually give them the territories of of Rome to the Pope. So what is the intention behind the documents known as the Pippins and the Constantine's donation? Well, the intention was to give lands in Rome to the Pope. If you remember, that was Pope Leo III. Then explain why the century is the unit of analysis for history. Well, if you remember over here again, we have this document of the centuries, and here you have very clearly the explanation. The unit of analysis is the smallest thing that we can still tell you something about what you are researching. Some centuries are smaller than others, so something is smaller than the century is not about, if you can see here, something is smaller than the century is not enough to talk about the transformation of the social products. What makes each century different from others are the characteristics. So over here we have it. So the answer is something smaller is not able to talk about the social transformations. That would be more or less the answer. Of course, we had a lot of different answers. Most of them were correct. And finally, explain the meaning of the Carolingian Renaissance. So again, if we go to our 8th century card, we see over here precisely the Carolingian Renaissance. And if you remember, we said that the Carolingian Renaissance is this moment in time in which the Carolingian rulers are going to have money again, enough money to try to rescue the culture of the classic culture. So that is the Roman culture, basically. So there had been a long time in which they hadn't printed any books at all. Wait, actually, they didn't print the books. They would write them down. People would write them directly with their hands, and there was a long time in which they weren't even doing that because they didn't have enough money to produce a book. Doing a book was something really expensive. So remember that we said that Charlemagne had enough money to do that. He had a lot of power. He was able to do this big cultural reform in which they would they would bring the classic culture back to the Frankish kingdom that was, for starters, if you remember, a barbaric kingdom. So what is the meaning of the expression Carolingian Renaissance? It is the first, or it is also called the first Renaissance, or it is the period in which the classic culture flourished in the Frankish kingdom or the Carolingian Empire. And again, it was due to all the power that Charlemagne was able to accomplish, and the economic capabilities that he acquired, that he was able to command architecture, to command literature. He was able to pay all those things that for a long time they didn't have enough money to do. So these were basically all the answers. They were, as you can see, really, really easy. And all you had to do is, as I told you from the beginning, pay attention to your to your document about the centuries that you have in Google Classroom, of course. Remember that you also have a summary, a video that summarizes all of these things in YouTube that I sent you. You have it in EdVoice. You had to see it actually your classwork from one of the previous weeks or 2 weeks ago. You had to watch that video that actually was a summary of these 4 centuries. You also had all your classes, of course, because you have the slides in Google Classroom. So you had all the information required to answer correctly this exam. And it was quite a simple exam, because if you remember, we have been studying these 4 centuries for more or less about a month, and we even had a previous review before we went out on vacations, on holidays. We had a review on the first 2 or 3 centuries, and now we after that we had a review on the whole 4 centuries that were going to be your exams. So these would be the right answers, and as you can see, you only have to see the document of the centuries, and to answer other 2 or 3 more questions, all you had to do was pay attention in class. So that is all, girls, and thank you very much.